When black people are powerful, the future looks a lot better for everyone. Let me tell you a few things about our year at Color of Change. This year we showed what change looks like when black people lead the way in politics.
Just 2 months after Robert Mugabe was forced out of his role as president of Zimbabwe, the country's government has started to unwind one of his key policies. Local farmers, some of whom now live in Australia, are being urged to return to the land that was seized from them to help revive the economy.
The Zimbabwean government oversaw violent farm invasions that began in 2000. The campaign drove most white farmers out of the country.
Clearly, the formulas deployed then they left a lot of bad feeling, and more importantly, the intellectual property left our borders.
Haiti used to be the most prosperous part of the New World. It was the jewel of the Caribbean and the pride of France's colonial empire. Great mansions dotted the countryside, and the social life in Haiti's towns rivaled that in the cities of France. Then the democracy craze hit France, and the madness also infected many of the Frenchmen in Haiti. Liberty, equality, and brotherhood were to be applied even to the black plantation workers who had been brought to Haiti from Africa. That was the politically correct thing, and political correctness had deranged just enough of Haiti's French population so that the population as a whole was not able to put up any sort of solid front against the madness. They sat in their clubs, and their drawing rooms, and their libraries, and they sipped their wine, and they observed what was happening around them in Haiti as the blacks were declared equals and brothers. And they discussed the situation, but they couldn't quite bring themselves to do anything about it before the massacres started. And then it was too late. And so all of the Frenchmen and their women and their children were slaughtered. Some of them in ways too horrible to describe on this program. And the books from their libraries, and the paintings and tapestries and sculptures from their townhouses and their plantation manors became trinkets and baubles for the black plantation workers. And then the subhumans had Haiti all to themselves. And what had been the richest and most productive part of the New World promptly sank back to an African level of squalor, misery, and poverty. The roads and cities built by the French fell into ruin. A peculiarly African mixture of anarchy and despotism took the place of French law and order. A little over a century later, in 1915, following an especially chaotic and bloody period, U.S. Marines were sent into Haiti to force a semblance of order on the country. The reason for sending them was to safeguard American business interests in Haiti, although President Wilson told Americans that the Marines were being sent to bring democracy to Haiti. The Marines remained in Haiti for 19 years. They not only enforced governmental stability there, but they also built schools and hospitals, a modern telephone system, and more than 1,000 miles of paved roads. We really gave the Haitians the basis for a fresh start. As soon as the U.S. Marines pulled out in 1934, however, the Haitians returned to their own way of doing things, to indolence, corruption, and voodoo. Everything the Americans had built for them gradually returned to the jungle. In 1958, the United States sent the Marines to Haiti again, this time with the aim of rebuilding the country's economy and infrastructure so that it would not succumb to communist influences. Again, we spent hundreds of millions of dollars rebuilding what the Haitians had wrecked and training thousands of them in the skills needed to keep the country running. But when we pulled out again, the country immediately returned to its old ways, its African ways. And in 1994, we tried the same foolishness all over again, claiming that we were restoring democracy to Haiti.
It started as a Back to Africa movement for freed slaves. In fact, the Constitution was written in Washington, and Monrovia, the capital city of Liberia, is actually named after President Monroe, and it became a state in the 1840s. So the freed slaves go back to Africa and promptly enslave the native Africans based on the plantation method they had learned in the U.S., which lasts for about 140 years until Samuel K. Doe, the first native African-born Liberian, was elected. But this doesn't last very long. Why? Because an American-educated, and some would say American-backed, rebel leader named Charles Taylor and his buddy Prince Johnson came from America and overthrew him.
We are not a military group here. I'm not a soldier. What we seek to do is to destroy these military dictatorships around Africa. And that's that Charles Taylor virus. If the civilians can throw out the army, wow, we are in trouble. Well, I love it. We will fight to the last man. I will get weapons from wherever I have to get it. If the Pentagon's got some, please give me some.
Despite reports that the government wants talks with the rebels, the violence goes on.
The government and people of this country assure you that the armed forces will protect them and that the rebel will soon be eliminated.
Rebel forces stormed into the center of the capital today. They are now less than a mile from the executive mansion where President Samuel Doe has barricaded himself with about 500 soldiers.
So is that why your nickname was General Butt Naked?
Yes, because I was naked, because I fought naked.
A lot of people would drink or do drugs before fighting?
Can you feel it? Nothing can save ya, but this is the season of catching the vapors. And since I got time, what I'm going to do is tell you how they spread it throughout my crew.
Yeah, most of my boys,
then
we drain the blood from the innocent child and drink it before going to battle.
So you kill the child?
Yes.
And then you drink the blood?
Yeah.
I left it up on a chopper, I'm gonna eat it. Lieutenant General, hot. Make sure you eat it.
So what kind of war is this? World War II. It's World War III.
Black power means coming together to make things happen for our people. We're fighting the racist money bail system that ruins black lives.
And this thing about the disparity of blacks and whites in jails, that's got to stop, because I got statistics right here which will prove me right. In New York City alone, okay, blacks are 23%. They make up 75% of the population. 75% of all shootings, 70% of all robberies, and 60% of all violent crimes. All right, the whites only 3%. Now, that is why there were more blacks in jail than there are whites.
But that's okay.
And now let me just finish here, and then you go. All right. So we look at that statistic. All right. They turn it around. You know, the racial demagogues out there turn it around that the blacks are being picked on.
Through policy change, prosecutor accountability, and corporate accountability.
It's a trap.
But we also have the power to bail people out ourselves. People who are trapped in jail just because they can't afford to get out. For example, Color of Change members helped raise over $400,000 to release over 100 women from jail on Mother's Day as part of the Mama's Day bailout. We are transforming the way that black people are represented in Hollywood by consulting on television and films and development and exposing bias in the industry to change the way that Hollywood works.
Django Unchained, I play a slave. How black is that?
And in the movie, I have to wear chains. How whack is that? But don't be worried about it, because I get out the chains, I get free, I save my wife, and I kill all the white people in the movie. How great is that?
These little young niggas out here, they gonna be fish food, okay? They gonna be fish food. They got little 7-year-old boys shooting choppers, putting the motherfucking bullet through the bullseye. These motherfuckers out here will shoot a whole motherfucking clip and won't hit a motherfucking thing. Man, you go on YouTube right now, they got white women that the white man done trained, 12 years old, shooting a motherfucking AR-15, hitting the bullseye every time she pulled the trigger. And a bitch-ass nigga concoct the motherfucker, shoot the whole clip, and don't shoot nobody, or shoot a motherfucker that he wasn't even aiming for. So if you know in a military situation that ain't no bullets out here. So if it's a shortage on bullets, that means every time you pull the trigger, you gotta put it through a motherfucker head. Period. You ain't got no time to be wasting ammunition. You don't. These crackers are spitting on niggas. They ready to go to war. What is niggas gonna do? Niggas ain't gonna do shit. They gonna go get their motherfucker. They gonna get their weed. They gonna play their video game. And when the cracker come down in the hood and say, bitch, load up in the truck, your ass is getting up in the truck.
Hands, but we have to, one, get the guns off the streets. Those types of guns, we don't need them. We used to have those guns when we were, you know, back in the day when you needed to go hunt and everything like that. You don't need those guns nowadays.
Because it's my right to sit on the street corner and take out with my boyfriend. That's my right.
Keep yelling. It really helps.
I bet you're a little bit racist.
We were going.
Well, there's the magic word. That is actress Danielle Watts from Django Unchained accusing an LAPD officer of being racist during a routine stop. But that was simply not the case.
Everybody thought that the LAPD was racist over this thing.
Why? Because here's what Danielle claimed. She says she and her boyfriend were just making out in a parked car, and cops harassed them because she's black and her boyfriend's white.
Now we got the entire police audio of the incident, and it tells a completely different story.
Somebody called the police saying that there was lewd acts in the car.
Yeah, somebody in an office building called 911 saying Danielle and her boyfriend weren't just making out, they were having sex with the car door wide open.
I bet there's at least one person up there who's a racist. I bet you.
Cops asked to see her ID, but instead of showing it,
she just goes walking off in another direction, like running off.
Which cops don't like. They get her back, they cuff her, and she goes off.
I serve freedom and love. You guys serve detainment. That's cool. I think I'd like to identify you to my publicist. What's your first name? You think you're better than me, and you think you have more power than me.
I think I do have more power than you.
We're all equal. And that's what our country is based on. The land of the free and the home of the brave. We are all equal.
I thought this was America. Huh? Isn't this America?
I like corrupting an audience to some degree or another and making you challenge some of your thoughts and some of your feelings about what the people on screen do.
You like corrupting the audience to a certain degree.
To a certain degree, to actually show you something and maybe show you that your little right and wrong world isn't as neat and pretty as you thought it was.
Empire star Jussie Smollett was the victim of a vicious, racist, and homophobic attack.
His attackers hurled racial and homophobic slurs.
Two people yelled racist and homophobic slurs.
Racial and homophobic slurs.
Not only homophobia, we're talking about racism. We're talking about hate with steroids.
They are looking for two suspects who were apparently wearing Make America Great Again hats.
The offenders uttered, "This is MAGA country."
The hate crime went down early this morning in Chicago.
Officials are investigating the alleged assault as a hate crime.
And now police say they're investigating this as a possible hate crime.
Anyone attacked in a hate crime like this is an outrage.
This is stomach-turning,
mind-boggling information. It's out of control.
Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi tweeting the racist, homophobic attack on Jussie Smollett is an affront to our humanity.
And Senator Cory Booker said the vicious attack on actor Jussie was an attempted modern-day lynching.
Kamala Harris calling the attack an attempted modern-day lynching.
But I'm so shaken by the story. This is horrible to report. This is a horrible story. This is a horrible story.
Yeah. I mean, the circumstances are just horrific.
Horrendous and unacceptable.
Absolutely despicable.
Yeah, a lot of people can't believe this is actually happening in 2019.
It's hard to believe that we're reporting, that we're even saying words like this in 2019.
And this is America in 2019.
Good evening, I'm Jeff Glor, and this is our Western edition. We're going to begin with an indictment on 16 felony counts. Actor Jussie Smollett, who was first arrested last month, is accused of staging a hate crime against himself. If convicted on the charges we learned about late this afternoon, he could face decades behind bars. Dean Reynolds has been following this story from the beginning and reports from Chicago.
Smollett, a co-star of the TV show Empire, was charged last month with a single felony for involving disorderly conduct for filing a false police report. Now, the Cook County grand jury has charged him with felonies for every alleged lie he told the Chicago police who were compiling that report. Smollett told them he was roughed up on the street near his Chicago apartment early on the 29th of January by two men who hurled racial and homophobic slurs at him, doused him with a chemical, and tied a noose around his neck, while yelling, "This is MAGA country." Initially, police called him a victim, but surveillance cameras showed no assault. They did show these two men, however, who quickly went from persons of interest to key witnesses when they told the cops Smollett had paid them to stage the attack.
Don't ever forget what happened to that French actor. You know what I'm talking about? Jussie Smollett. He's a very famous French actor. He was the victim of a racist and homophobic attack. You see, Jussie Smollett is gay and he is black, not just French. The whole country was up in arms. He was talking about it all the time on the news. And for some reason, African Americans, we were like oddly quiet. We were so quiet about this shit that the gay community started accusing African American community of being homophobic for not supporting him. What they didn't understand is that we were supporting him with our silence. Because we understood that this nigga was clearly lying.
Well, earlier this week, actor Marlon Brando met with Jewish leaders to apologize for comments he made on Larry King Live. Among them, that, quote, Hollywood is run by Jews. The Jewish leaders accepted the actor's apology and announced that Brando is now free to work again.
But we also get to ensure that black children get to see authentic representations of themselves on the screen, which is what we did by supporting Ava DuVernay's A Wrinkle in Time with the Give a Child the Universe campaign.
Opened the door to the greater conversation of race in this country.
But I'll share this humorous anecdote. It's true. I'm driving on the Santa Monica freeway the day after after the episode in which my character, Kunta Kinte, the adult, loses his foot because he refuses to relinquish whatever had to be relinquished. He had to make a choice between his necessary plumbing or his foot, and he chose to lose the foot. So I'm driving on the freeway, and a very, very large African-American gentleman driving a very large, ancient piece of steel from Detroit pulls up alongside him on the freeway and says, "Your window down." So I rolled the window down. He said, "Man, pull over." So I pull over. He gets out of the car. He leans on my car and says, "Man, I got to tell you something. I saw you in that Roots thing last night. I got my pistol and I shot my TV."
Tonight, we're going to discuss the truth about Oprah Winfrey. For decades, she has met secretly with David Rockefeller, Bill Gates, and others to promote a world government program that is designed to reduce the African population alone by at least 50%.
Behind closed doors on this New York campus, a secret gathering of some of the world's most powerful people. Gates, Buffett, Bloomberg, Winfrey. It was like the Super Friends.
In the great hall of the Justice League, there are assembled the world's 4 greatest heroes.
Together with others at the meeting, including George Soros, Ted Turner, David Rockefeller, they're worth more than $125 billion.
That much money, that much power around one table. It begs the question, what were they doing? What were they scheming? Total world domination?
She's the black face on the New World Order. She's the woman that was behind Obama. She's the one that puts her billions of dollars into tax-free foundations so they can't be taxed, just like Bill Gates, just like his wife, Melinda Gates, just like Warren Buffett and others. So I want to challenge all of you to do research into the weird world government Luciferian system she pushes, and to go read for yourself ABC News, the London Guardian, and others that did whitewashes on the fact that she's trying to set up a world government to reduce populations. Listen, once people become industrialized, they stop having as many children. In fact, they start going negative, 1.3, 1.4 children for every 2 adults. Now realize the globalists are conditioning the third world to flood the United States and Europe and to be very anti-Caucasian, anti-white. Just because a lot of them have been brainwashed and turned into political zombies of globalist conquest doesn't mean we stoop to that level of programmed people. We realize they're victims and stand up for the truth and stand up for justice. Because make no mistake, they can have their way with poor Africans and Latin Americans and Asians. But here in the Western world, they are hiding by stealth, by Trojan horse, their attacks on the general public. The chemicals in the food and water, the estrogen mimickers, the cancer rates, the autism exploding, all the secret testing that's been declassified. Oprah Winfrey meets in secret with the most evil men and women in the world every year and is given talking points to push on her audience to convince them that they're bad and should roll over and die. She is planning my future and your children's future with the most twisted people this planet's ever seen. And that's a fact. And God, Oprah, you claim you're here to free the people, but you just turned into a slave master. What have you done? The truth about Oprah Winfrey is, whether she's conscious of it or not, she is serving pure anti-human evil, wickedness, corruption. Go do your own research. The rabbit hole is so much deeper than I can break down here in this short presentation. But everything she sells is magical thinking to a group of disenfranchised, manless women sitting at home, desperate for a family, desperate for life, desperate for a culture. She's all part of the Great Society that started in the 60s and took black illegitimacy from about 5% to almost 80%. And now you see it in every other group of people. The state is being put in charge of the family. The family's being dismantled. And women are being given the system as their husband for protection and being taught from birth that men are their enemy. This is an attack on our species. And Oprah Winfrey is nothing but a Judas goat. Oprah Winfrey, whether she knows it or not, is probably one of the greatest incarnations of the devil we see on this planet today.
I said this for my own, community in the South. There are still generations of people, older people, who were born and bred and marinated in it, in that prejudice and racism, and they just have to die.
We're in central Appalachia, the epicenter of the opioid crisis. This is ground zero. This is perfect storm of economic problems, significant number of doctors located in one particular place whose practices are suffering because population decline.
In North Carolina, last year, there were 10 million prescriptions for opioids written. That's one for every man, woman, and child in the state of North Carolina. They get hooked, they can't get any more of those pills, so they go on the street. They get heroin, which is cheaper and more plentiful.
The power of the narcotic over the person is unbelievable. We're seeing overdoses from the age of 17 to 70 with heroin and heroin derivatives in this community.
Thanks for joining us for this special report, A State of Crisis, South Carolina's opioid epidemic. I'm Caitlin Stansel. Tonight we look at the role doctors have played in creating the problem and the role they have in its solution.
Good morning. Deaths from opioid overdoses have more than quadrupled since 1999, and that's made ambulances like this one very, very busy. Some of the most severe devastation has been right here in Kentucky, and paramedics who used to go days without a single overdose are now lucky if they go just a few hours.
Yes, Tennessee is one of the top-ranked states for opioid abuse and addiction. Physicians and policymakers agree something needs to be done. But as News Channel 5's John Newland tells us, we're a long way from winning the fight.
The first ever opioids State of the State today. Experts talked about how Mississippi is tackling opioid abuse and what still needs to be done to fix the problems. The director
just 2 years ago, the CDC ranked Alabama highest in the nation for opioid prescriptions, with more prescriptions than people in the state.
Georgia's opioid crisis is getting worse. That's the report today from Fulton County District Attorney Paul Howard.
The number on the steps of the Capitol today, the director of the Association of Cities and Counties said that drug companies helped create the opioid crisis in Arkansas. And today, he said those companies should pay to help fix it.
We have the second highest opioid prescription rate in the country, behind Alabama.
The lawsuit
The state of Florida is now suing two of the largest pharmacy chains in the country over their distribution of opioids. Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi has added CVS and Walgreens as defendants to a complaint first filed in May against companies that make and distribute opioids. The amended lawsuit alleges the defendants, which also include Purdue Pharma, the maker of OxyContin, engaged in deceptive marketing practices and helped to fuel the national opioid epidemic.
In 2018, we continue to stand up to corporations who profit from our pain.
We are pleased to bring in our guest host this morning, RLJ Company's founder and chairman, BET founder, Bob Johnson. How's business?
Business is very good. I believe that if you take into account the Trump tax cut, you take into account the drop in unemployment, and particularly unemployment for African Americans, the lowest it's ever been in history. So when you put all of that together, and particularly from my vantage point of the focus on urban markets and African American community, when you got about African Americans are down around 4 or 5, something like that, that's a pretty good testament to the fact that there are a lot of jobs out there looking for people who are traditionally underemployed. And that
African-American unemployment is the lowest it's ever been. The jobs, that's 4%. GDP might be. When do you smell the coffee?
You're a little bit in that world of no good deed goes unpunished. And that's what's happening politically. Everything is so toxic that even if you do something good, the opposition party, the opposition interests, we're so divisive that no matter what the president would do or no matter what the Democrats would do, it's all negative.
Because of us, MasterCard revised their policies and put a dent in the ability of hate groups to generate funds, to recruit new members, host violent rallies, build power, and spread hateful propaganda online. Because of pressure from Color of Change and our partners like the SC Justice Group, Google announced that they would no longer allow bail bond companies to purchase ad space. And no, Facebook, you cannot say that you are working to make your platform safer for people of color and then launch an attack against us to undermine our community's power. Our campaigns made Facebook agree to a civil rights audit, and now we have forced them to publicly release progress for full transparency. No, Disney, you cannot alter a groundbreaking black cartoon character's features. We got Princess Tiana restored to her original depiction, a win for our members, black children, and their families. Black power means unleashing the genius and joy in our community. So many incredible people this year partnered with Color of Change to speak up on the issues impacting black people. John Legend, talking about ending money bail. Veena Sood, talking about the representation of crime on TV. Chris Rock and Keegan-Michael Key bringing new energy to our fight against voter suppression.
And apparently the concern was that they were intimidating people who were trying to go inside to vote. A Republican poll observer actually called the police. The police were here. We missed them. They came and they left. But that person who called the police is here. Why don't you tell us what you're... Step down off the curb if you don't mind. Why don't you tell us what you're suggesting was going on here?
Well, as I walked up to the door, we got a phone call that there was intimidation going on. And so as I walked up to the door, two gentlemen in Black Panther garb, one of them brandishing a nightstick, standing immediately in front of the door. As I walked up, they closed ranks next to each other. You know, I'm an Army veteran. That doesn't scare me. So I walked directly in between them, went inside and found the poll watchers. They said they've been here for about an hour, and they told us not to come outside because a black man is going to win this election no matter what.
And then we're going to have to kill some crackers. That's right, love it. We're going to have to kill some cracker babies. Huh? To hell with what National Geographic putting out. I'm telling you to your face here tonight, we're going to have to kill some little Penelopes and some little Robbies.
I said if you're going to be merciful, we give them 24 hours in South Africa to get out of town by sundown. I say if they don't get out of town, we kill the men, we kill the women, we kill the children, we kill the babies, we kill the blind, we kill the cripple, we kill the crazy, we kill the faggots, we kill the lesbians. I said, God damn it, we kill them all. You say, well, why kill them all? Why kill the women? First, why kill the babies? They're just little innocent blue-eyed babies. Because, God damn it, they're going to grow up one day to rule your babies. Kill them now. Why kill the women in South Africa? I said kill the women because the women are the military manufacturing center. And every 9 months they lay down on their backs and reinforcement rolls out from between their legs. So shut down the military manufacturing center by killing the white woman. Why kill the elder crackers? The old crepit crackers in South Africa. How in the hell you think they got old? They got old oppressing and killing black people. I say kill a cripple, kill a elf, kill them all. Kill a faggot, kill a lesbian. And after you kill them all, I said that day about Mandela to let you know what he really knows about me don't know a damn thing. I said then you go to the goddamn grave and dig them up and kill them a goddamn again because they didn't die hard enough.
The success of Muhammadan Islam in deceiving, misinforming, deforming and contorting both history and reality over a period of almost 1400 years has been astounding. That is, until now. The greatest tragedy about this particular subject is that most of the descendants of African slavery, the black people in the Americas, around the world, as well as among the African blacks, are totally ignorant of the actual facts. Before we lose the concentration of our listeners, I would like to make the following statement and then prove it. That the worst, most inhumane and most diabolical institution of the black African slave trade was initiated, refined, perpetrated and implemented by the Mohammedan Arabs and later aided and abetted by the black converts to Mohammedan Islam. I predict that as usual, the two subcultures, those of denial of facts and of political correctness, will attack us without once disproving a single statement and or conclusion that we make. Slavery was not created by the white races, because it has existed throughout human history and practiced by every tribe, culture, civilization, racial group, and religion. In fact, the very word slavery has its root in the name Slav, based upon the Slavic peoples of Europe who were subjugated by other Europeans. It is not common knowledge that the Arabic word abd is synonymous with the meaning of slave. For example, Abdullah means literally the slave of Allah, and that in the language of the Arabs, all black peoples are called abid, plural, for slaves. While much has been written concerning the transatlantic slave trade, surprisingly little attention has been paid to the Islamic slave trade across the Sahara, the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean. While the European involvement in the African transatlantic slave trade to the Americas lasted for just over 3 centuries, the Arab involvement in the African slave trade has lasted 14 centuries, and in some parts of the Mohammedan world is still continuing to this day. The birth of Mohammedan Islam and its conquests brought about the birth of institutionalized, systematized, and religiously sanctioned slave trade on a massive and global scale. In fact, the Quran allows the taking of slaves as booty or reward for wars of aggression against any and all unbelievers, most of the human population. This has led to an enormous number of so-called holy wars, jihad in Arabic. There was and is absolutely nothing holy about these wars, which are primarily to plunder, slaughter, rape, subjugate, and rob other human beings of their wealth, produce, freedom, and dignity. Mohammedan Muslim states and tribes attacked other non-Muslim groups to achieve these objectives. Although Islamic jurisprudence laid down regulations for the treatment of slaves, however, incredible and heinous abuses have occurred throughout the history of Mohammedan Islam. By the Middle Ages, the Arabic word abd was in general used to denote a black slave, while the word mamluk referred to a white slave. Ibn Khaldun, 1332 to 1406, the preeminent Islamic medieval historian and social thinker, wrote, "The Negro nations are, as a rule, submissive to slavery, because they have attributes that are quite similar to dumb animals." It should also be noted that black slaves were castrated based on the assumption that the blacks had an ungovernable sexual appetite. When the Fatimid Caliphate came to power in Egypt, they slaughtered all the tens of thousands of black military slaves and raised an entirely new slave army. Some of these slaves were conscripted into the army at age 10. From Persia to Egypt to Morocco, slave armies from 30,000 to up to 250,000 became commonplace. The Islamic slave trade took place across the Sahara Desert, from the coast of the Red Sea, and from East Africa across the Indian Ocean. The Trans-Sahara trade was conducted along 6 major slave routes. Just in the 19th century, for which we have more accurate records, 1.2 million slaves were brought across the Sahara into the Middle East, as well as a further 450,000 down the Red Sea and 442,000 from the East African coastal ports. That is a total of 2 million black slaves just in the 1800s. At least 8 million more were calculated to have died before reaching the Muslim slave markets. A comparison of the Islamic slave trade to the American slave trade reveals some extremely interesting contrasts. While 2 out of every 3 slaves shipped across the Atlantic were men, the proportions were reversed in the Islamic slave trade. 2 women for every man were enslaved by the Muslims. While the mortality rate of slaves being transported across the Atlantic was as high as 10%, the percentage of slaves dying in transit in the Trans-Sahara and East African slave market was a staggering 80 to 90%. While almost all the slaves shipped across the Atlantic were for agricultural work, most of the slaves destined for the Muslim Middle East were for sexual exploitation as concubines, in harems, and for military service. While many children were born to the slaves in the Americas, the millions of their descendants are citizens in Brazil and the United States of today, Very few descendants of the slaves that ended up in the Middle East survived. While most slaves who went to the Americas could marry and have families, most of the male slaves destined for the Middle East were castrated, and most of the children born to the women were killed at birth. It is estimated that possibly as many as 11 million Africans were transported across the Atlantic, 95% of which went to South and Central America, mainly to Portuguese, Spanish, and French possessions. Only 5% of the slaves ended up in what we call the United States today. However, a minimum of 28 million Africans were enslaved in the Muslim Middle East. Since at least 80% of those captured by Muslim slave traders were calculated to have died before reaching the slave markets, it is believed that the death toll from 1400 years of Arab and Muslim slave raids into Africa could have been as high as 112 millions. When added to the number of those sold in the slave markets, the total number of African victims of the trans-Saharan and East African slave trade could be significantly higher than 140 million people. What is obscene about this whole subject is the Mohammedan, Muslim, and Arab culture of denial regarding their complicity in the African slave trade, as well as the ignorance of black Muslims about the reality of their past and present conditions. The statistics and reports above are based upon the logbooks kept at the African slave ports, ship logs, travelers' reports, eyewitness accounts, etc.
Pop quiz. Who's the whitest prophet in history? You're probably thinking Joseph Smith, founder of Mormonism, right? What if I told you there's a prophet out there who's so white he makes Joseph Smith look like Malcolm X? He's so white he makes a bowl of vanilla ice cream yell, "Get him out of here, he's blinding me!" He's so white his 9-year-old child bride didn't need a nightlight. What if I also told you that this pale, pasty white prophet had black slaves and referred to Ethiopians as raisin heads? Would you call him a racist? Or would you give him yet another free pass because our expectations automatically drop to the floor whenever we discuss the Prophet of Islam? Many people who haven't read the Muslim sources assume that Muhammad was dark-skinned, but Arabs are classified as Caucasians and they can exhibit a variety of shades and tones. So if we want to know what Muhammad looked like, we'll have to go through some of the descriptions of his appearance found in the Hadith. Now, if Muhammad were sitting in a crowd of his fellow Arabs, how would we spot him? Sahih al-Bukhari, number 63. Narrated Anas bin Malik, while we were sitting with the Prophet in the mosque, a man came riding on a camel. He made his camel kneel down in the mosque, tied its foreleg, and then said, "Who amongst you is Muhammad?" At that time, the Prophet was sitting amongst us, leaning on his arm. We replied, "This white man reclining on his arm." "Hey, which one of you is Muhammad?" "This white Tom Willis-looking white guy leaning on his white arm, that's who." But let's keep reading about a prophet who makes the Brady Bunch look like NWA. Sahih Muslim, 6081. It was narrated that Abu Juhayfa said, "I saw the messenger of Allah with a white complexion and some white hairs." White complexion with white hairs. Who knew that Anderson Cooper was a 7th century prophet? Sahih Muslim, 6071. It was narrated from Al-Jurairi from Abu at-Tufail. I said to him, "Did you see the messenger of Allah?" He said, "Yes, he was white, with an elegant face." This guy's so white, he makes Queen Elizabeth look like Queen Latifah. And the Muslim sources go out of their way to remind us how white Muhammad was. They tell us about the whiteness of his shins, and the whiteness of his thigh, and the whiteness of his leg, and the whiteness of his stomach, and the whiteness of his forearms, and the whiteness of his armpits, and the whiteness of his cheeks. Based on these descriptions, a friend of mine who's a police sketch artist was able to put together a drawing of Muhammad. Have you seen this man? Kind of blends in with the whiteness of the paper. On a side note, to all my jihadi viewers, I can't figure out if this counts as a cartoon of Muhammad or not, but I don't really care. So, Muhammad was whiter than a bowl of Cool Whip, but when he wasn't busy being scooped onto a slice of apple pie, he was setting an example for his followers by keeping a tight rein on all his black slaves. Sahih al-Bukhari, 7263. Narrated Umar, I went to the house of the Prophet, and behold, Allah's messenger was staying in a mashraba, and a black slave of Allah's messenger was at the top of its stairs. I said to him, "Tell the Prophet that here is Umar bin al-Khattab." Then he admitted me. Sahih al-Bukhari 6161. Narrated Anas bin Malik, Allah's messenger was on a journey, and he had a black slave called Anjasha, and he was driving the camels very fast, and there were women riding on those camels. Allah's messenger said, "Wayhaka, O Anjasha, drive slowly the camels with the glass vessels," i.e. the women. Here's one about a black slave who was shot to death while unloading Muhammad's luggage, Sunan an-Nasai 3858. It was narrated that Abu Hurairah said, "We were with the Messenger of Allah in the year of Khaybar, and we did not get any spoils of war except for wealth, goods, and clothes. Then a man from Banu ad-Dubayb, who was called Rifa bin Zayd, gave the Messenger of Allah a black slave who was called Middam. The Messenger of Allah set out for Wadi al-Qura. When we were in Wadi al-Qura, while Middam was unloading the luggage of the Messenger of Allah, an arrow came and killed him. The people said, 'Congratulations, you will go to paradise.' But the Messenger of Allah said, 'No, by the one in whose hand is my soul, the cloak that he took from the spoils of war on the day of Khaybar is burning him with fire.'" Just to clarify, Muhammad had sex with a 9-year-old girl, robbed caravans, and beheaded hundreds of Jews, but he's good. His black slave, by contrast, grabbed a cloak before the spoils were divided, so he's headed to hell. Welcome to Islam. In Provisions of the Afterlife, pages 30 to 31, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah lists 28 of Muhammad's male slaves and 12 of his female slaves. Some of these slaves were black, some were not. Muhammad renamed one of his black slaves Safina, which means ship. He called his slave Ship because he would load up the slave like a ship and make him carry everything. Muhammad apparently thought that black slaves were worth less than Arab slaves, since he once traded 2 of his black slaves for an Arab slave he wanted to set free because the Arab slave had converted to Islam. We know that Muhammad had sex with his female slaves because he eventually got one of them pregnant. But don't worry, a white leader getting a slave girl pregnant is only creepy when Thomas Jefferson does it. Speaking of leaders, mindlessly obeying Muslim leaders was so important to Muhammad that when he wanted to emphasize obedience, he told his followers that they had to obey even the worst leader imaginable. We find Muhammad's worst case scenario in Sahih al-Bukhari 7142. Narrated Anas bin Malik, Allah's messenger said, "You should listen to and obey your imam, even if he was an Ethiopian slave whose head looks like a raisin." Muhammad gives a similar example in Sahih Muslim 3138, where he commands his followers to obey their leader, even if he's a black slave with missing limbs. So the worst possible leader of a community of Muslims, according to Muhammad, would be a black slave. For the sake of clarity, I should point out that women are excluded from the hierarchy of possible leaders. Muhammad said that a nation will never be successful with a woman as a leader. But it gets worse. Muhammad tells his followers what Satan looks like in Ibn Asaq, page 243. The apostle said, "Whoever wants to see Satan, let him look at Nabtal ibn al-Harith. He was a sturdy black man with long flowing hair, inflamed eyes, and dark ruddy cheeks." Which one of you is the prophet? This white guy. What does Satan look like? That black guy. Now, how did a religion that was inaugurated by a white prophet who had black slaves and referred to Ethiopians as raisin heads and said that Satan looks like a black man ever get the reputation it has among African American Muslims today? Well, here in the West, there's a general atmosphere of ignorance about Islam. People don't know even the most basic facts about Muhammad and the Quran, and this allows Muslim preachers to say whatever they want about Islam because no one's going to correct them. So if a Muslim preacher is talking to a woman who's interested in women's rights, Muhammad was a champion of women's rights. If he's talking to someone who has a high regard for science, the Quran is a scientific masterpiece filled with miraculous scientific insights that were only verified centuries later. If he's talking to someone who's concerned about racial justice, Islam is the religion that liberates slaves and establishes racial equality. Absolute nonsense, but people convert to Islam because they believe what they're told and don't bother reading the Muslim sources to see if the preacher's story checks out. Now, to those of you who've bought this mess, to those of you who believed the Muslim preacher when he said, "Hey, if you really want to stick it to whitey, you need to convert to Islam," the religion of a white man who bought, sold, and traded African slaves and whose followers institutionalized black African slavery centuries before Europeans joined in, and who continue enslaving black Africans even today, if you fell for this, I say, and I say it again, you've been had. You've been took. You've been hoodwinked bamboozled, led astray, run amok. This is what these white prophets with black slaves do. But now that you've seen what the Muslim sources say, now that you know you've been deceived, you have a choice. You can either leave Islam, or you can continue serving a man whose descriptions in your most trusted sources make him completely indistinguishable from the Pillsbury Doughboy, and whose teachings legitimized race-based slavery for 14 centuries. Just remember that if you continue honoring a slave trader who's about as dark as the cream filling of a Twinkie, and who had black slaves and called Ethiopians raisin heads and said that Satan looks like a black man, you're not a freedom fighter, or a social justice warrior, or a champion of civil rights. You are the ultimate Uncle Tom. And in case you'd like to know how seriously they take Muhammad's whiteness in the Muslim world, I'll leave you with a quotation from Ash-Shifa, one of Islam's most popular and respected books on Muhammad's life and teachings. Ahmed ibn Sulaiman, Sahnun's companion, said that whoever says that the Prophet was black is killed. The Prophet was not black. Calling Muhammad a black man was a death penalty.
There's another thing I've been talking about and that you need to be aware of, because I think people have gone into a state of osmosis about this. But my friends, when I spoke at the Oxford Round Table, I think it was St. Anthony's College, it's a conglomeration of schools at Oxford, that school was built, the wall around the school and the building that I spoke in was built in the 12th century. Now, I'm referencing the 11th century, the 12th century, because during that period of time, there were several phenomena going on. Most people were of the mindset that the earth was flat and that if you sail too far, you'd fall off of it. But the other thing is that there had never been a white man that had set foot on the continent of Africa in the 11th, 12th, 13th, and 14th, and 15th century. No white man had ever set foot on in the continent of Africa. It had always been all black all the time. The Great Wall of China, built similar times. The Taj Mahal in India. The beautiful buildings in Russia. Peter the Great, who was a very unusual and unlikely and unseemly leader of Russia, who turned out to be one of the best leaders of Russia. Peter the Great, tall fella, interesting, dynamic, inquisitive mind, camouflaged himself and went to England to study shipbuilding. He wanted to build ships. And Moscow had been the leading city on the west coast of Russia, the biggest nation on the planet. And Kiev and a few other cities were around, and everybody just gathered around Moscow. But Peter the Great wanted to build another city because he believed that Russia should be a seagoing nation. He wanted to build ships. So he took a bunch of people down to the edge of the Black Sea and built St. Petersburg. I don't know if you know about St. Petersburg. It is a beautiful city. No white man ever set foot on the continent of Africa. You can't go to Africa and find anything that was built in the 11th century, 12th century, 13th century, 14th century. They're still standing today because nothing was ever built. They did. They had large groups, tribes, but they lived in tents and they campfired. They didn't build anything. And the nations that they built are all dissolved today. There's nothing there. You can go to Liberia. James Monroe gave the Talbot family millions and ships and sent them back. You go to Liberia, go to Monroeville now. They're running around there, young boys with machine guns and cutting off one another's hands. The place, they don't pick up the garbage. Dead dogs stay in the street for days. The place is a mess. It's Africa. They don't know how to do nothing.
They came to loot the construction compound. We managed to arrest 3 or 4 of them alive. Then the fighters said that they killed the captives and removed their hearts and livers to eat later. Some said they prefer the meat cooked, but their commander, Major Vamu, claimed that he eats it raw. Anybody who is your enemy, you can eat him. If I know there's somebody who wants to kill me, I'll grab you, I will eat you raw. Yes. We eat it, we eat it, we eat it. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Tempera. I'm going to eat this Lieutenant General's heart. He's a rebel. It's an ambiguous and harsh practice. It's also West African juju, evil magic, which only helps to kill more Liberians.
Well, the white man has kept us from building. No, white man never, listen, white man was, when they were building Cambridge and Oxford and England and Taj Mahal and building St. Petersburg, no white man ever been to Russia, been to Africa. It was just in 1492 that Columbus had to convince the world that if you sail so far, you're not going to fall off. Remember, the world, everybody was pretty much thinking that this is the end of it. There's not one city you can go from North Sahara all the way down to Cape Town, and there's not one city, there's not one building, there ain't nothing. Ain't nothing. And we got to come to terms with that. Some woman pointed out to me there's a rock somewhere in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was once called Rhodesia. It was Zimbabwe, and it was named by Cecil Rhodes, who was a very wealthy Englishman who was one of the first that journeyed down into South Africa, even when there was fighting between the Zulus and the Afrikaners. But the thing of it is, that's very interesting, is that the children in Zimbabwe were playing with stones. They were barefoot, the red dust there, and they were just playing the stones. And one of the Cecil Rhodes lieutenants said, "The boy, bring me that stone about that big. Bring me that." And the kids have been playing with it for days. They put it beside the tree, and then they come back and play with it again. They throw it around and whatnot. Well, South Africa, and in that region, has one of the largest, most productive diamond pikes in the world. Pikes that just shoot diamonds up out of the air, out of the ground from, I don't know, 150,000 feet down ever so often. And the children were playing with diamonds. I mean, large diamonds. But the king and African people had no idea of their value or even what they were. And this was back in the 19th century. It wasn't way back in the Voodoo days. We have to come to terms with it. No matter how painful it is, you can go from California to South Africa, to Kenya, to Tanzania, and by the way, he changed the name of the country to Rhodesia. They've changed it back now to Zimbabwe. And you can't find one city that black people have built. You can find plenty of ghettos, but you can't find one city. Now, that's not pleasant. And many people will argue with me. They go, "Oh, yeah, we did build a city, but it burned down." Well, London is still standing. Hitler's Luftwaffe bombed Germany like they won't no end. There's a city in Germany called Coventry where Hitler had broken the code of, Churchill had broken the code of Hitler's military plans, and Churchill knew that the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, was coming tonight to bomb Coventry. And because he didn't want Hitler to know he had broken the code, he allowed that city to be bombed, and they bombed it back to the Stone Age. But it was a good decision on behalf of Churchill, because they broke the code, they were able to then break the German army. But saying that the white man stopped, there ain't never been no city in Africa. There ain't nobody never built one. And we understand, well, why? Even here in New York City, even in America, there ain't no city y'all have ever built. You ain't never built no city. You ain't never built no city. And God gave you Harlem, and I tried to tell you how to hold on to that, and you ain't got no sense about that. And you need to come to terms with this. Stop this foolishness. Stop it. Stop it. You ain't never built nothing. You ain't never built nothing. That whole continent. There's not one memorial, there's not one thing standing in the entire continent. But everywhere you go to China, you go to Mexico even, you go to Brazil, and everybody's done something. There's a problem here, and we got to stop fooling ourselves and ask God to help us. Help us. Help us. We need help. The only thing we've ever done, we did it because the white man gave us a platform upon which to do it. He helped us. He built schools for us and let us go. He built highways so we could travel. We got to admit it. Got to stop these black folk running around here talking about the white man did this, white man did. You got to get that mess out here. You ain't never going to be a productive for God. You ain't never going to be able to understand anything till you get that fool realize that we are in trouble. You'll never call on God for help if you don't realize how difficult the situation is. All these years. And even here in Harlem, look at here. You don't have to go to Africa, forget about 12, 13, 14, 15 cities. Look here in Harlem. Look here. First time black person got to get 2 quarters, they moved so far away from Harlem that you can't fire a missile to the moon and get them. I thought I'd share those things with y'all tonight. The moment we realize, wait a minute, Pastor Man don't hate black people. He's telling us the truth. He's telling us the truth. He's telling us what's wrong with us. What's wrong with us? And one of the most beautiful cities in Africa is Cape Town and Johannesburg, but white folk built that. And black folk are tearing it up because they don't know how to do nothing. But God has sent me here. God has sent me here to speak this truth. And if you're not following me, if you think that somehow or another that I'm just here to try to make black folks look bad, it means you don't want to know the truth because you can't show me. You can't forget about going to Africa. You can't show me nothing there. In every place we are, there's more than 300 of us. It's a ghetto everywhere. All right, my friends, I thank y'all for letting me spend this time. I feel so empowered that God has given me a fresh anointing to continue this work. I'm excited. This work that lies ahead of us, I want you to understand the truth that we speak. Make a commitment. Stop that jigaboing that you're doing. All that stuff, that bad personality you got, all that's, get delivered. Get delivered.